Welcome back. It was a crime which pushed everything else off the front pages. 3 men, all known criminals, found shot dead in the Essex countryside. It was a cold-blooded, professional killing. The victims had many enemies, but which one wanted them executed?
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Point 8. The applicants query why the last dialed number on Mr. Tate's landline, according to the memory of the telephone handset, is said to have been Mr. Tucker's mobile 327. When the last outgoing call on the 6th of December 1995, according to itemised billing data, was to Miss Carey at 18:06. The applicant submits that the finding of Mr. Tucker's number on the handset means that Mr. Tate's landline must have called Mr. Tucker again after 18:06. They further submit that such a call is most likely to have been made after 2200 that day, as Miss Carey's account was that she was outside Tate's house between 1810 and 2200 hours and Mr. Tate was not there. The applicants also make the following arguments in relation to the voicemail for Mr. Tucker's mobile 327. Point 1. The fact that he did not answer the incoming call at 1909 on the 6th of December 1995 does, quote, not equate to Tony Tucker being dead and unable to answer his mobile phone, as he may have had his phone turned off or had no network signal or been engaged on another incoming call. Point 2. The 1909 caller did not leave a message for Mr. Tucker, so he would not have received an alert from his voicemail, and this could explain why he did not return the call. Point 3. In any event, searches of the relevant billing data illustrate that Mr. Tucker often failed to respond to messages left on his voicemail. The Commission has considered the applicant's submissions on this issue, which could all have been raised at trial, and takes the view that they add nothing to the evidential position as set out for the jury. It remains the case that there is no evidence that Mr. Tucker made or answered any calls after 1707 on the day in question. Whilst on its own this does not, quote, equate to Tony Tucker being dead and unable to answer his phone at 1909, the absence of any evidence of Mr. Tucker using his telephone after 1909 was a legitimate aspect of the case for the jury to consider. Issue 6. Statement S177, which is alleged to be an undisclosed witness statement by Darren Nichols. It is submitted by the applicants that there exists a witness statement by Darren Nichols which has never been disclosed to the defence and which should be obtained by the Commission now. In the course of its inquiries, the Commission has established that S177 is registered to the Holmes nominal index of Darren Nichols. However, there is no associated document which can be opened when S177 is selected on the system. The Commission's inquiries have also established that there is no witness statement in the paper files of Essex Police which corresponds to S177. Both in the paper files and on the Holmes system, the first statement by Mr. Nichols is the one which was registered as, quote, S177A. According to the record on Holmes, S177 was registered on the 20th of May 1996, and it is described as having been registered in error. Mr. Nichols was in custody on the 20th of May 1996, but did not make his first witness statement until the 21st of May. The question that therefore arises is, how could the police register a statement to Mr. Nichols before they knew that he was going to provide witness evidence? The Commission has considered this matter at length. Essex Police have been asked to provide an explanation, and expert Holmes' opinion has been sought by the Commission in relation to this anomaly. Essex Police have conceded they do not know the definitive answer to this and have considered a number of theories. The Commission has sought to find a technical explanation by considering the potential for there to be an audit record behind the Holmes system which could shed some light on the matter. The Holmes system was upgraded to Holmes 2 sometime after the investigation of this case, and the original Holmes account was converted to Holmes 2 for current access. Holmes 2 has a fully accessible audit system which records all transactions on the account during the period of its usage. Unfortunately, the original Holmes system had no such facility and cannot therefore provide any assistance in this matter. However, at a meeting between the Commission and Essex Police on the 4th of August 2010, a hypothesis was presented that could explain this anomaly. The investigation in this case was managed on two Holmes accounts, one for the drug importation matters and another for the murder investigation. Both ran simultaneously from a common major incident room and they were cross-referenced to each other. This meant that they were searchable, but any data could only be entered onto one of the accounts at a time by separate processes. Statement S21 is not the first interview conducted with Nichols, it is the third. The previous two interviews, dated the 13th and 14th of May 1996, were, quote, no comment interviews. These were not registered until sometime later, the 12th of June 1996. The explanation proffered for this is that S21 was the first interview in which Nichols gave any information regarding the murders and the part he played in it, and the subsequent interviews would have been treated as a higher priority as far as their progress through the MIR system was concerned. The Commission is of the view that this explanation is both credible and logical, and is consistent with the Commission's knowledge and understanding of major incident management and the Holmes system. Issue 7. The allegation that Essex Police colluded with and coached Darren Nichols in his account of events. Mr. Wombs and Mr. Steele's representative, Mr. Bowen, has made numerous submissions which allege that Mr. Nichols was coached in his account of events by Essex Police. In connection with these submissions, Mr. Bowen alleges that the police interviews with Nichols, in which he gave his account of the night of the murders, were not carried out on the 14th of May 1996 as recorded by police, but at a later date. It is submitted that this backdating alone would demonstrate that the investigation was corrupt and the resulting convictions unsafe. It also leaves open the possibility that there were earlier off-tape meetings with Nichols, in the course of which he was coached with a story. The Commission observes that Mr. Bowen has provided voluminous arguments in support of his submission that Nichols' interviews were backdated, but the Commission has seen no evidence which supports this serious allegation. The submission remains unsubstantiated speculation and does not give rise to a real possibility that the Court of Appeal would overturn the convictions in this case. The Commission also notes that Mr. Nichols was represented by a solicitor, Mr. Craddock, at many of the interviews in question. Mr. Craddock has denied both in evidence at trial and in his statement to the Commission's Section 19 investigation in 2004 that there was anything improper about Mr. Nichols' police interviews. In order for the applicant's allegation about backdating to be correct, Mr. Craddock would have had to have been complicit in any impropriety on the part of Essex Police. For the avoidance of doubt, the Commission has discovered no evidence that Mr. Nichols' interviews were conducted in an improper manner, nor has the Commission discovered any evidence that Mr. Craddock has been untruthful in his recollections about the interviews. Mr. Bowen has pointed out that Mr. Craddock was a police officer before he became a solicitor, but the Commission does not consider that this makes it more likely that he has behaved improperly in this case, nor does it mean that Mr. Craddock cannot be trusted in his account. In support of his submission regarding the alleged backdating of interviews, Mr. Bowen relies on Mr. Nichols stating in Interview 7 on the 17th of May 1996 at 10:11 a.m. that, quote, someone had been charged with being in possession of a shotgun, end quote. Mr. Bowen points out that Mr. Steele was not charged with possession of a shotgun until 22:42 on the 17th of May, and so argues that Interview 7 must have taken place after this time and been backdated. The Commission notes that this submission arises from material, namely Mr. Nichols' interview records, which was available at trial, and it could have been utilised in cross-examination of Mr. Nichols and his interviewing officers at that stage. In any event, having considered the submission, the Commission takes the view that there is no real possibility of it leading to the Court of Appeal to find that the interview transcripts for May the 17th were backdated, or that there was anything improper about the way Mr Nichols' interviews were conducted by Essex Police. In this connection, the Commission notes again that Nichols' solicitor Mr Craddock was present at all interviews on May the 17th, 1996. As explained above, Mr Bowen alleges that Nichols' interviewing officers questioned him off tape. He refers in particular to alleged off-tape discussions on the 16th and 17th of May 1996. This submission arises from cross-referencing Mr Nichols' custody record for those dates with the transcripts of his police interviews on the 17th of May 1996. These documents were disclosed to the defence at trial and, as pointed out by Mr Bowen, DC Brown and DC Winston were cross-examined at trial about off-tape conversations with Nichols. The submission is not new for the Commission's purposes and cannot form the basis of a referral to the Court of Appeal in the absence of exceptional circumstances. In any event, the Commission has discovered no evidence that Mr Nichols was ever coached in his account by Essex Police. The Commission notes that Mr Nichols' solicitor Mr Craddock has stated that as far as he is aware, Mr Nichols was never coached or spoken to off tape regarding his account of events. However, Mr Bowen submits that Mr Craddock's statement for the Section 19 investigation actually supports the submission that Mr Nichols was interviewed off tape. Mr Bowen highlights page 5 of the statement, where Mr Craddock describes the interviewing officers asking Mr Nichols, quote, various questions about what mobile telephone he was using at the time of the offences and as to whether he was carrying it and whether it would have been turned on or off, end quote. Mr Bowen states that such questions do not appear anywhere in the Nichols interview transcripts, and that this supports his submission that Mr Nichols must have been questioned off tape. The Commission does not consider this submission to be correct. In the Commission's view, the line of police questioning, which appears at pages 15 to 21, page 19 in particular, of the interview transcript for the 17th of May 1996 at 16:38 hours, contains the quote, various questions about what mobile telephone Mr Nichols was using at the time of the offences, end quote, which are referred to in Mr Craddock's statement. There is no real possibility in the Commission's view that a Court of Appeal would find Mr Craddock's statement to support the submission that Mr Nichols was spoken to off tape. In any event, Mr Craddock's Section 19 statement was available to the applicants and to the Court of Appeal in 2006, and it was open to the applicants to pursue this point at that stage. In further support of the submission that Mr Nichols was spoken to off tape by Essex Police, Mr Bowen has drawn the Commission's attention to a faxed summary of the case against the applicants, faxed on the 22nd of May 1996. This summary refers to the details of the events of the 6th of December, purportedly obtained from Mr Nichols, but which do not appear in Mr Nichols' answers during police interview. In particular, Mr Bowen refers to references to a quote, blue Range Rover and an allegation by Mr Nichols that Mr Steele had referred to Mr Womes as a quote, evil cunt when describing the killings. Neither of these points appear in Mr Nichols' police interviews, which simply refer to a quote, Range Rover and Mr Steele's alleged comment that Mr Womes was a cold-hearted bastard, end quote. Mr Bowen adds that references to a blue Range Rover do appear in the briefing notes of DC Shakespeare, 16th of May 1996, and that DC Shakespeare repeated, quote, blue Range Rover when putting Mr Nichols' account to Mr Steele in interview on the 17th of May. Furthermore, according to Mr Bowen's note, prosecuting counsel John Butcher referred to Mr Nichols' description of a quote, blue Range Rover when summarising the case at the first remand hearing at Chelmsford Magistrates Court on the 18th of May 1996. Mr Bowen submits that, since these words didn't come from Mr Nichols in the disclosed police interviews, Mr Nichols must have discussed the case with officers off tape or in recorded interviews which have not been disclosed. Mr Bowen also points out that the vehicle is referred to as a quote, dark Range Rover in police summary document D56. Mr Bowen submits that Essex Police attempted to cure these discrepancies over vehicle colour by coaching Mr Nichols to refer to a quote, dark coloured or blue Range Rover in his witness statement S177A. Mr Bowen also submits that Essex Police removed the anonymous reference to Mr Steele describing Mr Womes as a quote evil cunt when the case was summarised in police document D56. Mr Bowen relies upon the fact that a text in D56 reads quote a cold-hearted bastard, which suggests that the text has been amended. The facts summary that Mr Bowen seeks to rely upon appears to be part of the facts history of Mr Steele as provided by Essex Police for the benefit of the prison authorities. This summary would have had no evidential standing whatsoever, as opposed to Mr Nichols' account of events as given in police interview and then in evidence at trial. In any event, whilst the discrepancies which Mr Bowen highlights may indicate that Mr Nichols has been misquoted in the facts summary, this does not necessarily indicate that Mr Nichols gave a conflicting account off tape. The same is true of the reference to the colour of the victim's Range Rover. The colour of the vehicle which was discovered in Workhouse Lane would have been well known to police officers dealing with the case, and the inclusion of the word blue is far more likely to be an error on their part rather than an indication that Mr Nichols gave further details off tape. In all of the circumstances, the Commission takes the view that Mr Bowen's submissions on this issue do not give rise to a real possibility that a Court of Appeal would find that Mr Nichols was spoken to off tape and coached in his account. In support of his allegation that interview records have been fabricated, Mr Bowen queries why, quote, error reference source not found, end quote, appears at the top of each page of certain Nichols interview transcripts. The Commission understands that this error message occurs when a form field is deleted rather than written within the normal way. This error message does not constitute evidence that Essex Police fabricated evidence.